Well, for several days in the summer of 2010, parts of downtown Toronto looked like a veritable war zone. Security fences, armed police, and violent, ugly protests in the streets. Today, the long-awaited report into Toronto police conduct that weekend was released, and the independent police watchdog could not conceal his anger. The CBC's John Lancaster has the details for us on this. John.
Peter, Jerry McNeely says civil rights were violated, people illegally detained, and police used excessive force. It was the largest security operation in Canadian history, but despite thousands of police and millions of dollars spent, it still went violently out of control.
All the people in charge must take responsibility for what occurred in Toronto that weekend.
McNeely's report says hundreds of officers acted professionally under intense pressure that weekend, but many others didn't.
This is in Canada right now?
No. Wow.
No.
That's right. You're in G20.
The report concludes that some citizens were arrested and subjected to illegal searches simply for walking downtown that weekend. McNeely says police used illegal, excessive force on peaceful protesters and finds they had no real plan to stop the violent ones, despite intelligence that said they would be there. Properties and businesses were left unprotected despite specific warnings there would be looting. In some cases, citizens and store employees had to defend themselves. The report reveals at one point the situation was so out of hand, Toronto's police chief called the G20 Command Center, demanding to know why officers, quote, weren't visible on Yonge Street as it was being ransacked.
Further down the street, we're just getting a little bit boxed in.
But it was this incident that still defines the G20 weekend for many Torontonians. Protesters, journalists, even passers-by were boxed in by police at a downtown intersection. The report says a commanding officer with a desire to, quote, own the streets, ordered the tactic known as kettling. McNeely says protesters were secretly called, quote, terrorists, and that not even the senior officers on the ground had control. Some officers began breaking ranks, allowing some protesters to flee. McNeely says they described their commander as, quote, maniacal. A total of 1,100 citizens were arrested that weekend, yet almost all were cleared of any wrongdoing.
There is much in this report to suggest that, frankly, there was, to be frank, mass illegal activity by the police.
Today, a protester who was detained had questions of his own.
What is the justice that I'm going to see? Like the officers who laughed at my wife when she needed toilet paper, or the ones that tried to watch her go to the bathroom.
McNeely says it's now up to police to regain the trust that may have been lost.
Citizens and police themselves will read my report, and they would see that certain things occurred that should not have occurred.
The city's police chief says he's ready to hold any member of his force accountable.
I want to assure you that if there is a finding of misconduct for any police officer of any rank, based on the facts and evidence heard in a tribunal, I am quite prepared to hold people accountable.
And that lessons have been learned.
I think the challenges we faced were unprecedented. It was a very, very difficult set of circumstances. We've never done anything on that scale before.
The report includes 42 recommendations, Peter, from training police about the limits of their power to developing better plans to deal with mass protests.
All right, John, thanks very much. John Lancaster here in Toronto.